My name is Sheikh Amir Fahd Al-Nassir. You won't find my face in newspapers or my sermons broadcast across satellite television. But for nearly 4 decades, I was one of the men behind closed doors advising the most powerful families in Saudi Arabia on matters of Islamic law and religious policy. I taught thousands of young scholars that Christianity was a corruption, that Jesus, whom we call Isa, was merely a prophet, never the Son of God. I believed this with absolute certainty. I defended it brilliantly. And I was catastrophically wrong. On 17 January 2026, I died in a car accident on a desert highway returning from a private religious conference near Jeddah. My heart stopped. The medics gave up. For what felt like hours but was actually minutes, I was gone. And in that impossible space between death and life, I met him. Not Isa the prophet we discuss in our texts. Not a teacher. Not a historical figure. I met Jesus Christ, the risen Son of God, standing in light that came from within him, speaking my name with a voice that shattered every certainty I had built my life upon. He showed me things that still wake me at night. He showed me a massive door, the door of grace, and it is closing. He showed me humanity's frantic attempts to reach God through our own efforts, every single one collapsing before reaching the other side. He showed me that He alone is the bridge. And He gave me a message. A warning. By the end of 2026, that door changes position. Grace becomes harder to hear. Hearts grow colder. The world enters a different season. What I am about to share has already cost me my position, my influence, and friendships I spent decades building. Some call me a traitor. Some call me deceived. Some, quietly, secretly, call me brave. But I don't care what they call me anymore. You need to hear this while the door is still open. Because Jesus told me something I can never forget. Some will listen. And that is enough. I am 61 years old. I was born in 1965 in a small town outside the holy city of Medina, Saudi Arabia. My family has served the kingdom for generations. My grandfather was a judge in the religious courts, known throughout our region for his unwavering commitment to Islamic law. My father before me trained scholars who would go on to teach at the Grand Mosque in Medina. We are a family known for one thing: absolute devotion to the faith. But there is something else about my family that shaped who I became. We didn't just serve publicly, we served the powerful privately. While other scholars gave Friday sermons to crowds, my father sat in private councils with princes and advisors, helping them navigate complex religious questions that could shape policy, affect international relations, or determine the fate of controversial cases. I learned early that real influence happens away from microphones and cameras. By the time I was 20 years old, I could recite entire classical texts from memory. I spoke Arabic with the precision of ancient scholars. I had mastered debates so thoroughly that students would tremble before asking me questions. By 40, I wasn't just teaching, I was advising. Government officials, business leaders, families whose names you would recognize if I were permitted to speak them. My work required absolute discretion. I traveled to conferences that were never publicized. I wrote policy recommendations that were never attributed. I sat in rooms where decisions were made about how Saudi Arabia would respond to Western religious influence, how we would counter Christian missionary efforts, how we would preserve the purity of Islam in our region. For 35 years, this was my life. Respect, honor, influence, a legacy I thought would outlive me. I had no idea it was all built on a lie I would one day have to face. But to understand how far I fell, and how high grace lifted me, you need to know where I came from. You need to understand the weight of what I carried, the certainty I possessed, and the secret doubt that haunted my nights even when I refused to speak it aloud during my days. 17th January 2026 began like any other day of influence. I had been invited to speak at a private religious conference near Jeddah, not the kind advertised in newspapers or discussed on social media. This was a gathering of perhaps 30 men, all carefully selected, all trusted. We met in a compound owned by a family whose wealth could shift markets. The topic was Western religious encroachment, Christian organizations quietly operating in the kingdom under the disguise of humanitarian work, digital evangelism targeting our youth, the slow erosion of certainty among young Saudis studying abroad. I spoke for 90 minutes. I quoted scripture. I cited historical precedents. I warned of dangers. Men nodded. Some took notes. Afterward, over tea and dates, several approached me privately to continue discussions. I felt that familiar warmth, the validation of being heard, of being valued, of mattering. By the time we finished, the sun had already begun its descent. My driver, Khalid, had been with me for 7 years. He was a quiet man, deeply respectful, always early. As we pulled away from the compound and merged onto the highway heading northeast toward Medina, he asked about the conference. I gave him a summary, nothing confidential, just enough to satisfy his curiosity. He listened carefully, as he always did. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of us. January in Saudi Arabia means cooler air, but the sunset still painted the sky in shades of deep orange and crimson. The horizon looked like it was burning. I remember staring out the window, watching the light fade over the dunes, feeling strangely contemplative. I had just spent hours defending absolute truth, yet something in my chest felt heavy. Khalid was telling me about his daughter's upcoming wedding when it happened. The explosion was so loud it felt like the air itself had shattered. The rear tire blew at over 120 kilometers per hour. Khalid's hands jerked on the wheel. I felt the vehicle lurch violently to the right. He tried to correct, but the physics had already taken over. We were spinning. The world outside became a blur of sand and sky and highway. Metal screamed against asphalt. I heard glass shattering, windows, windshield, something inside the dashboard. My body slammed against the seatbelt. My head cracked against something hard. Then, silence. Not gradual silence. Instant. Total. Like someone had turned off the sound of the entire world. I opened my eyes, expecting pain. There was none. I expected to see the crushed interior of the vehicle. Instead, I was floating. Actually floating, perhaps 10 meters above the wreckage. I could see everything with perfect clarity. The SUV had rolled 3 times and come to rest on its side. Smoke rose from the engine. Khalid was crawling out of the driver's window, his face bleeding but conscious. He was screaming something, but I couldn't hear him. Then I saw myself. My body was still strapped in the passenger seat, visible through the shattered window. My head was tilted at an unnatural angle. Blood ran down the side of my face, staining my white thobe dark red. I wasn't moving. 2 vehicles had stopped. Men were running toward the wreckage. One of them reached me first, through the window, checking for a pulse. I watched him pull me out onto the sand with the help of another man. They laid me on my back. My eyes were open but empty. One man immediately began chest compressions. Another pulled out a phone, shouting into it, probably calling emergency services. I should have been terrified. I should have been screaming, trying to get back into my body. But instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Deep, unexplainable peace. I watched the man doing compressions. His hands pressed rhythmically against my chest. Press, press, press. Breathe. Press, press, press. Breathe. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cool evening air. Another man arrived with what looked like a first aid kit. Someone else had flagged down traffic. The man doing compressions began to slow. He looked at his companion and shook his head. That's when I felt it. Something pulling me. Not physically. I had no physical body to pull. But my awareness, my consciousness, my soul, whatever I was in that moment, began to move upward. The scene below me started to shrink. The wrecked vehicle. The men surrounding my body. Khalid sitting on the ground with his head in his hands. The stopped traffic. The orange desert. All of it fading. The world dissolved into darkness. But not empty darkness. Living darkness. The darkness wasn't empty. It was alive. I could hear something in it. Distant singing, though calling it singing feels inadequate. It was more like voices woven into music, woven into light, woven into sound, all existing simultaneously in a way that should have been chaos but was somehow perfect harmony. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around me like water around a stone in a river. I was moving. Not walking. I had no legs to walk with. Not falling. There was no sense of down. I was being carried, pulled, drawn forward through this living void by something I couldn't see, but could feel as clearly as I'd once felt sunlight on my skin. Then, ahead, I saw it. Light. At first just a pinpoint, like a single star in an endless night. But it grew. And as it grew, I felt warmth. Not the scorching heat of the desert I'd left behind, but warmth that felt like welcome, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The warmth increased as the light expanded, swallowing the darkness degree by degree until I was moving through pure brilliance. The sensation was like wind through water, if wind could think and water could sing. I felt myself dissolving and reforming, being pulled through something both solid and liquid, both gentle and overwhelming. The light wasn't just around me, it was inside me, through me, remaking me with every moment. Then, suddenly, impact. My feet touched ground. Solid. Real. More real than anything I'd ever stood on before. I stumbled forward, catching myself, and looked down. The ground beneath me wasn't earth or stone. It shimmered like light trapped inside crystal, translucent but somehow firm, pulsing with colors I'd never seen before, not just variations of red or blue or gold, but entirely new colors my mind had no names for. They moved beneath the surface like living things. I raised my eyes and lost my breath. The place I stood in defied every law of physics I'd ever learned, every description I'd ever read. The colors here didn't just reflect light. They were light, but light that had weight and texture and fragrance. The air itself felt intelligent, aware, as if it was watching me with benevolent curiosity. Every breath I took tasted like joy. Trees stretched upward all around me, but calling them trees was like calling the ocean a puddle. They were towers, massive columns of gold and emerald that spiraled into a sky I couldn't fully comprehend. Their leaves caught light and threw it back transformed, creating patterns of radiance that shifted and danced. To my left, a river flowed. But its water looked like liquid glass, perfectly clear, perfectly bright, moving with purpose and singing as it moved. I could see depth in it that seemed to go on forever. Then I noticed my hands. The injuries were gone. The blood, the cuts, the torn skin, all vanished. My hands looked young, strong, flawless. I touched my face and felt smooth skin where age had carved lines for decades. I flexed my fingers and felt strength flow through them like fire without heat, like power without effort. Whatever body I inhabited now felt simultaneously lighter than air and stronger than steel. Is this paradise? I whispered. My voice sounded strange, clearer, purer, as if the air itself polished every word before releasing it. The atmosphere changed. Not with thunder or wind or any physical shift. The change was spiritual, emotional, fundamental. The air that had felt gently aware suddenly felt intensely focused. Authority pressed down on everything. Not crushing authority, but the kind that makes you realize you are standing before something infinitely greater than yourself. Yet woven through that authority was love so profound it made my chest ache. I felt someone behind me. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, yet every instinct also whispered that I wasn't ready for what I would see. My heart, did I still have a heart, pounded in my chest. Slowly, fighting against a fear that was somehow mixed with desperate hope, I began to turn. The light intensified. And there he stood. A man. But so much more than a man. Light didn't fall on him from some external source. It radiated from within him, emanating from his very being like heat from fire. His robe moved like living brightness, shifting and flowing with colors that hurt to look at and impossible to look away from. His face held features I could recognize. Eyes, a mouth, the structure of humanity, but infused with something that transcended flesh. His eyes. When they met mine, I felt completely and utterly known. Every thought I'd ever hidden. Every lie I'd ever told myself. Every moment of pride, of doubt, of secret sin. Every single thing I was lay exposed before those eyes. Yet I felt no rejection. No condemnation. Only love that saw everything and loved anyway. I knew who he was. Not Isa the prophet we discussed in our seminars. Not a teacher whose words we could debate. Not a figure from history we could analyze and dismiss. This was Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Standing before me in glory, I had no categories for. My knees gave way. I didn't choose to fall. My body simply couldn't remain standing in the presence of what I was seeing. I collapsed forward, trembling, my face toward the crystalline ground that now felt like the only appropriate place for me to be. Decades of certainty shattered in a single moment. 35 years of teaching that he was merely a prophet, that divinity belonged to Allah alone, that Christians had corrupted the truth, all of it crumbled like sandcastles before a wave. I had built my entire life on the absolute conviction that this moment was impossible. Yet here I was, prostrate before the impossible made flesh. Every sermon I'd ever given condemning the Trinity echoed in my mind like accusations. Every student I'd convinced that Jesus was just a man felt like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. Every private conversation where I dismissed Christianity as Western deception now burned in my memory like hot coals. I had been so certain. So absolutely, brilliantly, catastrophically certain. And I had been wrong. Amir. He spoke my name. His voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard, like many waters flowing together in perfect harmony, like quiet music that somehow contained thunder without violence. It resonated not just in my ears but in my chest, in my bones, in the deepest parts of whatever I had become. The sound of it was authority and tenderness, woven so completely together that they became indistinguishable. Stand. It wasn't a request. It was a command. But spoken with such kindness that obedience felt like gift rather than obligation. I rose slowly, my body still trembling, unable to meet his eyes. I kept my gaze fixed somewhere near his feet, where light pooled on the ground like liquid gold. Then I felt his hands on my shoulders. The moment his palms touched me, warmth flooded through my entire being. Not physical warmth. This was something deeper, something that touched places in me I didn't know existed. It was emotional warmth, spiritual warmth, the sensation of being seen and accepted simultaneously. Every cold place in my soul suddenly felt thawed. Every hard place softened. Every broken place began, impossibly, to mend. The warmth spread from his hands through my shoulders, down my arms, into my chest, filling me like water filling a vessel. I gasped at the intensity of it. Do you know who I am? His question was gentle, but it demanded truth. Not the truth I'd taught for decades. Not the sanitized version I'd presented to thousands of students. The actual truth that my soul now knew beyond any possibility of denial. My lips trembled. The words felt like they might kill me to speak, yet keeping them inside felt worse. You are. I struggled to breathe. You are the Son of God. Silence. I waited for judgment. For wrath. For the righteous anger that I deserved after spending my life denying what I'd just confessed. I had led thousands away from this truth. I had mocked it, dismissed it, argued brilliantly against it. Then he smiled. The smile transformed his face. It didn't diminish his authority or his power. If anything, it intensified them. But it added something that broke me completely. Joy. He was joyful that I'd spoken the truth. Not smug. Not vindicated. Genuinely happy that I had finally seen what he'd been waiting for me to see all along. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Each word carried weight that seemed to reshape reality around it. Not just philosophical weight, ontological weight. The words weren't describing truth. They were creating truth, establishing it, making it more real than the ground beneath my feet. He turned slightly, his robe shifting with movement that seemed both physical and not. He gestured with one hand, not pointing, but inviting. Walk with me. It was invitation, not command. He was offering me something, not demanding something from me. After everything I'd done, every lie I'd taught, every soul I'd potentially led astray, he was inviting me to walk beside him. I stepped forward on legs that still shook. As we began to move, the garden around us shifted. Not violently, but fluidly, like reality was rearranging itself to accommodate where he wanted to go. The trees of gold and emerald moved back, creating a path. The crystalline ground stretched forward. The river of glass altered its course to flow parallel to our direction. The beauty that had seemed overwhelming moments ago now began to fade into the background. Not because it became less beautiful, but because walking beside him made everything else secondary. His presence pulled my attention like gravity pulls matter. We walked in silence for what felt like both seconds and hours. Time seemed to function differently here, if it functioned at all. With each step, I felt the garden growing more serious around us. The colors became deeper. The light became more focused. The air became heavier with purpose. Then, ahead, I saw where we were going. The edge of something enormous. We stopped at what appeared to be the border of the garden. Beyond it, the ground simply ended. And what lay beyond that edge made every nerve in my body scream warnings I couldn't articulate. Jesus stood beside me, his hand still resting gently on my shoulder. Look, he said softly. I looked. And I understood why he had needed to prepare me. The chasm before us defied comprehension. It stretched wider than any sea I'd ever seen, deeper than any canyon could possibly reach. The edges dropped away into a darkness, so profound it seemed to devour light itself. I stepped closer, my feet stopping just short of where the crystalline ground ended, and looked down into the abyss. The darkness wasn't still. It moved like smoke, churning and roiling, alive with something I instinctively recoiled from. And from somewhere deep within that darkness came sounds, not screams exactly, but cries. Moans heavy with regret. Voices calling out words I couldn't quite distinguish, but whose tone communicated everything. Loss, despair, the unbearable weight of too late. I tore my eyes from the pit, and looked across to the other side. There, separated from us by this impossible distance, stood a city. But calling it a city was like calling the sun a candle. It blazed with light that made the garden behind us look dim by comparison. Towers rose impossibly high, their walls appearing to be constructed from crystallized glory itself. Streets shone like rivers of gold. The air above it shimmered, with what looked like music made visible. Everything about it radiated permanence, perfection, peace, home. The word came to my mind unbidden. That city was home in a way no earthly place had ever been. What is this? I whispered, my throat tight. Jesus stepped beside me, his presence both comforting and terrible as we stood at that edge. This, he said, his voice carrying sorrow that made my heart ache, is the separation between humanity and God. As he spoke, the scene before me shifted. I could suddenly see them, countless people on this side of the divide, standing where I stood, staring at the city of light across the chasm. Hope and determination marked their faces. They weren't giving up. They were trying. I watched a man gather prayers like stones, stacking them carefully, building a bridge of his devotion. 5 times daily prayers. Midnight prayers. Prayers whispered in prostration. Each one a stone laid with sincerity. The structure grew, extending out over the void, reaching toward the other side. But it wasn't long enough. Not nearly long enough. The bridge crumbled. The man stumbled, grasped at air, and fell into the darkness below. His cry joined the chorus of regret. Another appeared, a woman this time. She carried charity like bricks. Money given to the poor. Food distributed to the hungry. Wells dug in dry places. Orphans cared for. Each act of kindness became material in her hands, and she built furiously, desperately, her pile of good works growing higher and higher. It collapsed before reaching halfway across. Others came into view, each with their own materials. One man carried fasting, decades of Ramadan, voluntary fasts, discipline of the body. Another woman brought rituals, pilgrimages completed, ceremonies performed with precision, traditions honored perfectly. A young man stacked religious knowledge, verses memorized, theology mastered, arguments won, debates dominated. I recognized him. I recognized all of them. Because I had taught them. I had taught them exactly this. That salvation was something you built. That paradise was something you earned. That if you were sincere enough, devoted enough, knowledgeable enough, you could construct your own bridge to God. Every structure collapsed. Every attempt failed. Every person fell. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Why? The word came out as a gasp. Why can't they cross? Jesus turned to look at me. His eyes held infinite gentleness, but his words carried the weight of absolute truth. Because nothing imperfect can reach perfection. He gestured toward the struggling masses, toward their frantic building, their sincere efforts, their desperate attempts. Human effort cannot erase human sin. The words landed like hammer blows against my heart. Each syllable shattered another piece of the theological foundation I'd spent my life constructing. I stared at the people falling, always falling despite their best efforts, despite their sincerity, despite their dedication. And I realized with horror that I wasn't just watching strangers. I was watching the fruits of my teaching. Every student I'd instructed in how to earn paradise through works. Every young scholar I'd convinced that if they just prayed harder, fasted longer, memorized more, gave more, they could build their bridge to God. Every person I'd assured that Islam provided the clear path, the perfect system, the guaranteed method. All of them building bridges that would never reach the other side. All of them falling into darkness because of what I'd taught them. Tears began streaming down my face. Not gentle tears, violent, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep I didn't know that place existed until this moment. My knees weakened again, but this time not from awe. From grief. From guilt. From the crushing weight of recognizing that I had spent decades leading people toward the very chasm I now stood before. I had given them blueprints for bridges that could never be completed. I had filled them with false hope, false confidence, false certainty. I misled them. I choked out. All of them. I told them they could, that they just needed to. I couldn't finish. The words died in the face of what I was seeing. Jesus placed his hand over my heart. The warmth that flooded from his palm should have been comforting, but instead it intensified everything I felt: the grief, the guilt, the horror of recognition. "That is why you are here," he said quietly. Before I could process what he'd said, Jesus stepped forward. "Wait." I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed through empty air. He was already moving toward the edge of the chasm, toward that impossible divide where countless souls had fallen trying to cross on their own strength. "What are you?" He didn't answer. He simply stepped to the very brink where the crystalline ground ended and the abyss began. Then he stretched. I don't have words for what I witnessed. His body didn't grow or extend in any normal physical sense. He remained himself, fully human, fully present, yet somehow he reached across that infinite distance. His form became a bridge of pure light, spanning the chasm that no human effort could cross. One side of him touched the ground where humanity stood, where I stood, where all the failed builders had stood with their inadequate materials. The other side reached the city of God, touching that place of impossible perfection and glory. And he held there, suspended between two worlds, connecting what could never be connected by any other means. The light that emanated from him blazed brighter than anything I'd seen yet. It didn't just illuminate the darkness, it drove it back. The churning smoke recoiled from his presence like a living thing fleeing fire. The cries from below changed tone, becoming fainter, pushed back by the sheer force of his holiness. The bridge he'd become was solid, real, unshakable. Then, as suddenly as he'd stretched across, he was standing beside me again. Whole. Present. His hand still resting on my shoulder, as if he'd never moved. But the bridge remained. "I am the bridge," he said, his voice carrying across the chasm and back again, echoing with authority that rewrote reality itself. "Only through me can anyone cross." As he spoke, I saw them, people stepping onto the bridge of light. Not building anymore. Not carrying materials. Not straining under the weight of their own efforts. Simply walking. Some came tentatively, testing whether the light would hold them. Others ran, weeping with relief. Some limped, carrying wounds from previous falls. Others came with empty hands, having finally released the burdens they'd been trying to use as building materials. Each one walked safely across. The light held them. Not because of who they were or what they'd done, but because of who he was. The bridge wasn't built from their prayers, or their charity, or their fasting, or their knowledge. It was built from his sacrifice, his perfection, his love. They reached the other side. They entered the city. They made it home. And all they'd had to do was accept the bridge he'd already built. The simplicity of it shattered me. My heart broke completely, not metaphorically, but in a way that felt physical even in this spiritual realm. Something inside my chest cracked open, and decades of carefully constructed theology came pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. I had spent my entire adult life teaching the opposite of this. I had taught people to build their own bridges, to trust their own efforts, to believe that paradise was something you earn through accumulation. Accumulate enough prayers, enough fasting, enough charity, enough knowledge, and eventually you'd have enough to reach God. I had taught them to do the one thing I now saw was impossible. And in doing so, I had kept them from the one thing that was actually possible, accepting the bridge he'd already provided. The tears came harder now, racking my body with sobs I couldn't control. Every student I trained appeared in my mind. Every lecture I'd given. Every book I'd written. Every private counseling session where I'd assured someone that if they just tried harder, did more, purified themselves better, they could earn their way to paradise. All lies. Not intentional lies. I'd believed every word. But that made it worse somehow. I had been sincerely, absolutely, devastatingly wrong. And my sincerity had given my lies credibility. My authority had given them weight. My position had given them reach. I misled them. I whispered through the tears, the words barely audible. All of them. Thousands of them. I taught them to build bridges when you had already. I couldn't finish. The magnitude of it overwhelmed me. Jesus turned to face me fully. He placed his hand directly over my heart, over the place that felt like it was breaking apart. The warmth from his palm flooded through me, but this time it didn't ease the pain. It intensified it. Not cruelly, but purposefully, like a surgeon cutting deeper to reach an infection that must be removed. That is why you are here, Amir. His words were gentle but absolute. You taught them to trust in works. Now you will teach them to trust in me. You showed them how to build. Now you will show them how to surrender. You led them toward the chasm. Now you will lead them to the bridge. The warmth in my chest grew stronger, and I understood. This pain, this grief, this guilt, this breaking, wasn't punishment. It was preparation. He was showing me the depth of my error, not to destroy me, but to ensure I would never forget. To ensure that when I spoke, I would speak with the authority of someone who had seen both sides, the futility of human effort and the sufficiency of divine grace. My purpose crystallized in that moment of agony. I wasn't here to be condemned. I was here to be commissioned. The scene shifted. One moment I stood at the edge of the chasm, Jesus' hand still warm over my breaking heart. The next, we stood somewhere else entirely, though, stood, and, somewhere, feel inadequate to describe the experience. The garden, the divide, the bridge of light, all of it faded like mist under morning sun. What replaced it stole my breath. Before us rose a door so massive it made mountains look like anthills. It stretched upward until it disappeared into a sky I couldn't fully perceive, and wide enough that its edges exceeded my field of vision. The material it was made from defied description. Crystal. Yes, but crystal that somehow contained fire without being consumed by it. Light moved within its structure like blood through veins, pulsing with rhythm that felt alive, purposeful. The door was open. But even as I watched, it was moving. Not quickly. The movement was almost imperceptible, like watching a flower close at dusk or ice form on a winter lake. But it was undeniable. The massive structure was slowly, inexorably, closing. What is that? I whispered, unable to tear my eyes from the sight. When Jesus didn't answer immediately, I turned to look at him. Tears ran down his face. Not silent tears. These came with grief that shook his shoulders, with sorrow so profound it seemed to bend the air around him. I had seen him smile with joy when I confessed his divinity. Now I saw him weep with anguish over what stood before us. The door of grace, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He gestured toward the massive portal, toward its slow but steady movement. As long as it remains open, anyone may come to me. Anyone. No matter what they've done, who they've been, how far they've fallen. While that door stands open, grace flows freely. Forgiveness is available. Salvation is offered. His tears fell faster. But humanity delays. They mock. They replace truth with pride, convenience with commitment, comfort with courage. They hear my call and say, later. They see the evidence and say, maybe. They feel conviction and say, but first, let me. He turned to look directly at me. The intensity of his gaze made me want to look away, but I couldn't. By the end of 2026, the door changes position. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything. It won't close completely. My grace never fully ends while time remains. But it will narrow. Grace becomes harder to hear through the noise. Hearts grow colder, more resistant. The world enters a different season. What is easy now becomes difficult. What is clear now becomes obscured. What is offered freely now must be fought for then. Cold flooded through my body, not the warmth I'd felt when he touched me, but its opposite. Ice seemed to form in my veins. My chest tightened. Why? I forced the word out. Why 2026? Jesus' expression held both sorrow and something else, something like inevitability, like watching a prophecy you've known about for ages finally approach its fulfillment. Because history has appointed moments, he answered. Times when heaven and earth intersect with particular intensity. Moments when choices made carry greater weight. Seasons when the spiritual atmosphere shifts and what was once open becomes restricted. He looked back at the slowly closing door. Humanity has been warned for generations. Through prophets. Through scripture. Through signs in creation itself. Through the still, small voice in every human heart that whispers truth even when minds reject it. But warnings have expiration dates. Grace has seasons. And this season, he paused, his voice breaking slightly, is ending. I watched the door's almost invisible movement. Measured against human time, it barely seemed to move at all. But measured against eternity, it was closing rapidly. What happens when it? I couldn't finish the question. When it narrows, Jesus said, the world will still have access to grace. But the ease of response changes. Hearts will be harder. Pride will be stronger. Deception will be deeper. Those who would have come easily in 2025 will struggle to come in 2027. Those who would have heard clearly before will barely hear at all after. He turned back to me. That is why you must return. That is why you must speak. Not to condemn, but to warn. Not to judge, but to offer hope while hope is easily grasped. The door is still open, Amir. But it won't remain this open forever. My mind raced with questions. What would narrow it? Why 2026 specifically? What events would mark this shift? But even as the questions formed, I understood they weren't what mattered. What mattered was the message. Now, while the door is open, before it changes, how much time? I asked. Jesus looked at the door, then back at me. You died in January 2026. You will return to January 2026. You have months, not years. Some will hear. Many won't. But those who do, his expression softened with a love so fierce it hurt to witness. Those who do will walk through while the way is still clear. The door continued its glacial movement inward. Still open. But closing. And suddenly, I understood the terrible urgency of what he was showing me. Jesus raised his hand, and the scene around us dissolved into something else. Not one vision, but many, flowing past me like water, like wind, like time itself moving at impossible speed. I didn't see details. He spared me the violence, the specifics, the graphic nature of what was coming. But I saw the scale. Nations trembling. Not from earthquakes or wars alone, but from something deeper, a shaking of foundations people thought were permanent. I saw governmental structures people trusted beginning to crack. Economic systems they relied on starting to sway. Social contracts they assumed were unbreakable beginning to tear. Trust breaking everywhere. Between leaders and people. Between neighbors. Between family members. The fabric that held societies together fraying at edges that had seemed so strong. Fear rising like floodwater. Not panic, Worse than panic. The slow, creeping fear that settles into bones and changes how people think, how they act, what they're willing to do to feel safe. Fear that makes them compromise. Fear that makes them cruel. Fear that makes them abandon principles they claimed were sacred. Faith being tested like gold in fire. I saw believers, real believers, not the nominal kind, pressed from every side. Mocked more viciously. Marginalized more completely. Forced to choose between comfort and conviction, between acceptance and truth, between fitting in and standing firm. Truth becoming rare. Not extinct. Jesus showed me it would never be extinct, but rare enough that finding it would require genuine seeking. Lies wouldn't just compete with truth. They would dress themselves up as truth, speak with authority, come with credentials, flow from sources people trusted. But then, light. Small light scattered throughout the darkness. Individual believers who refused to compromise. Communities that held firm when everything around them bent. Families that chose truth when choosing lies would have been easier. Young people who stood for Christ when their entire generation was walking away. The lights were small, but they were steady. And in the gathering darkness, they shone brighter than I would have thought possible. Hope embedded in warning. That's what he was showing me. Not just catastrophe, but endurance. Not just judgment, but grace still available in the midst of it. Not just doors closing, but people still walking through before they did. Then I felt it. The pull. The same sensation I'd experienced moving through the living darkness, but reversed now. The light around us began drawing me backward, away from Jesus, away from this place between worlds. No, I reached for him. I'm not ready. You must return. His voice was firm but gentle. Tell them what you saw. The pull grew stronger. I felt myself being drawn away despite my resistance. Tell them I am the bridge, Jesus continued, his words following me as I moved. Tell them the door is still open. Tell them grace is still flowing freely. Tell them to come now, while coming is easy. But not forever, I whispered, the words both question and statement. But not forever, he confirmed. The distance between us grew. His figure began to fade, though his voice remained clear. Will they listen? I called out, desperation in my voice. After everything I taught them before, after I spent decades telling them the opposite, will anyone believe me? His smile was the last thing I saw clearly before the light consumed everything. Some will, he said softly. And that is enough. Then everything changed. Weight. Sudden, crushing weight. The weight of having a physical body again. A body damaged and broken. Pain flooded every nerve, erasing the strength and wholeness I'd felt moments before. My chest felt crushed. My head throbbed with agony. My lungs burned. Air. I gasped, drawing in breath that tasted like copper and sand. The air was thin, inadequate, nothing like the intelligent atmosphere I'd been breathing. It took 3 attempts before my lungs would expand properly. Voices. Shouting. Urgent. Speaking Arabic but sounding muffled, like I was hearing them through water. We have a pulse. He's breathing. Allah be praised. He's back. Get the oxygen, quick. My eyes opened to a sky that looked dull. Faded. Gray compared to the colors I'd just witnessed. The sunset that had seemed so beautiful on the drive from Jeddah now appeared washed out, lifeless. Sand pressed against my back, rough and hot. Someone was kneeling beside me, pressing an oxygen mask over my face. Another person was checking my pulse, counting under his breath. A third voice was on a phone calling for an ambulance. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't work. My mouth tasted like blood. Don't try to talk, someone said. You were dead. Your heart stopped. We got you back, but you need to stay still. Dead. The word echoed in my mind. I had been dead. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination or oxygen deprivation creating fantasies. I had died. I had left this world. I had stood in another realm. I had met Jesus Christ. And he had sent me back. With a message. With a warning. With a commission I couldn't refuse even if I wanted to. The sky above me continued to look impossibly dull compared to where I'd been. But I was here. I was alive. And I had work to do. The weeks that followed my return were the longest of my life. Physical recovery came slowly. Broken ribs. Severe concussion. Internal bruising. The doctors called my survival a miracle, though they meant it medically, not spiritually. They had no category for what had actually happened during those minutes when my heart had stopped. But physical pain was nothing compared to what came next. I told my family first. Gathered them in my hospital room 3 days after the accident, when I could finally speak without gasping. My wife sat beside the bed, holding my hand. My 2 sons stood near the door. My daughter sat in the corner, her eyes already red from crying over my injuries. I told them everything. My wife wept. Not the relieved tears of almost losing a husband. These were tears of confusion, of fear, of not knowing what this meant for our life together. My older son grew angry, his face flushing as he accused me of delirium, of medication-induced hallucinations. My younger son said nothing, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. My daughter left the room before I finished. Some cried. Some grew angry. Some refused to believe. But I had seen what I had seen. My colleagues came next, carefully, cautiously, behind closed doors. Senior advisors. Fellow scholars. Men I'd worked alongside for decades. They listened with expressions that shifted from concern to alarm to something harder. You cannot speak of this publicly, one said. It would destroy everything you've built, another warned. People will think you've lost your mind, a third added. Or worse, they'll think you've betrayed Islam. The smartest among them said nothing, just looked at me with eyes that communicated a single message: silence, or else. The internal struggle nearly broke me. Fear whispered constantly. Fear of losing my position. Fear of public humiliation. Fear of danger. Real, physical danger. In Saudi Arabia, religious deviation isn't just controversial. It's dangerous. But silence burned worse than fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door. Still open. Still moving. Still closing. I saw the people falling into the chasm, their bridges of human effort collapsing beneath them. I heard Jesus' voice. Tell them what you saw. How could I stay silent when silence meant letting people walk blindly toward the edge? 2 months after the accident, I spoke publicly. Not in a mosque. Not at a conference. I simply told my story, first to a small gathering of students, then to anyone who would listen. In our digital age, stories don't stay small for long. Within days, it spread like wildfire. Videos appeared online. News articles followed. Headlines I never imagined seeing. Saudi religious advisor claims he met Jesus. Prominent Islamic scholar says he saw heaven. Sheikh Al-Nassir's shocking near-death testimony. The reactions came in waves. Some mocked openly. Social media filled with accusations of insanity, deception, Western influence. Some threatened, messages promising consequences, warnings about what happens to apostates, reminders of how betrayal is dealt with. But others listened. Quietly. Secretly. Messages came through indirect channels. I need to know more. Something you said resonated. Could we talk privately? The losses mounted quickly. My position as advisor, gone. Invitations to speak at conferences, withdrawn. Protection from powerful families, evaporated. Friends I'd known for 30 years stopped returning my calls. My name, once spoken with respect, became controversial at best, blasphemous at worst. I lost influence. I lost protection. I lost friends. But I gained truth. And truth, I discovered, weighs more than everything I lost combined. Now I live differently. Smaller. Quieter. No prestigious titles. No seats at important tables. No influence in the halls of power. But I speak, in small gatherings, in private conversations, through whatever channels remain open to me. I speak despite opposition. Despite danger. Despite the cost. Because the message is more important than my comfort. So now I speak directly to you, whoever you are, wherever you are reading this. Jesus Christ is not only a prophet. He is not merely a teacher or a good man or a historical figure to be admired from a distance. He is the Son of God. He is the bridge spanning the chasm between humanity and God that no human effort can cross. He is the door, the only door, through which anyone can enter into relationship with the Father. And that door is still open. For now. But 2026 is the appointed moment. History has its seasons, and this season is ending. What is easy today becomes difficult tomorrow. What is clear now becomes obscured then. Grace still flows, but the flow is changing. You don't have forever to decide. None of us do. I spent 35 years teaching people to build their own bridges. 35 years convincing them that if they just worked hard enough, prayed long enough, accumulated enough good deeds, they could earn their way to God. I was brilliant in my arguments, confident in my teaching, absolutely certain in my doctrine. And I was absolutely wrong. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't wait until you are standing at the edge of that chasm, watching your carefully constructed bridge collapse, realizing too late that all your effort was never going to be enough. The bridge is already built. Jesus built it. He is it. All you have to do is stop trying to build your own and step onto His. The door is open. Walk through it. Grace is flowing. Receive it. Time is short. Choose now. Not because I say so. My voice carries no authority anymore. But because He said so. Because I saw it with eyes that had moved beyond this world. Because I stood before the door of grace and watched it slowly, inexorably closing.